Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, July 22nd, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today: 25 Western nations condemn Israel for killing civilians. So the foreign ministers from 25 Western U.S. allied nations have released a joint statement condemning Israel for its inhumane killing of civilians in Gaza, and they demanded an end to the genocidal war. As some people have pointed out, there's no humane way to kill civilians. They call it inhumane killing of civilians, which is kind of strange language. But the reason why I wanted to highlight this story, make it the top, because this is a list of U.S. allies, and it really goes to show how out of step with the entire world the U.S. is by continuing to support this genocide in Gaza. So the statement was signed by the ministers from the U.K., Australia, the foreign ministers, the UK, Australia, Austria, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Iceland, Ireland, Italy, Japan, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Poland, Portugal, Slovenia, Spain, Sweden, and Switzerland. Missing from the list is Germany, which is a major arms supplier to Israel, second after the U.S., and obviously the U.S. is not going to sign a statement like this. And the signatories strongly condemned the current so-called aid system in Gaza, which is run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is based in the U.S. and has just become a death trap for starving Palestinians. So the statement said, quote, "The suffering of civilians in Gaza has reached new depths. The Israeli government's aid delivery model is dangerous, fuels instability, and deprives Gazans of human dignity. We condemn the drip feeding of aid and the inhumane killing of civilians, including children, seeking to meet their most basic needs of water and food. It is horrifying that over 800 Palestinians have been killed while seeking aid. The Israeli government's denial of essential humanitarian assistance to the civilian population is unacceptable. Israel must comply with its obligations under international human law," end quote. So they said over 800 Palestinians have been killed while trying to get aid. That number has actually now crossed over 1,000, and we'll get into that in another Gaza story. So the 25 nations also condemned Hamas's October 7th attack and called for the remaining Israeli captives to be released while also demanding an unconditional ceasefire. They said, quote, "We urge the parties in the international community to unite in a common effort to bring this terrible conflict to an end through an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire. Further bloodshed serves no purpose. We reaffirm our complete support to the efforts of the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt to achieve this," end quote. So they're also saying, they support a diplomatic agreement, but they're also saying that they want to see an unconditional ceasefire. An immediate ceasefire. And that's what I really think people should be calling for instead of a ceasefire deal or anything. I mean, people are starving to death. Women and children are collapsing of malnutrition. Babies are starving to death. People are being massacred by the hundreds every single day. You know, it just needs to stop. I mean, it's just... and of course, the Israeli Foreign Ministry rejected the statement. I don't even want to mention what they said. It doesn't matter. They're the ones committing a genocide. And the statement comes as Israel has really escalated its attacks on Gaza. And again, we'll get more into that in the update on the situation in Gaza. The next one here goes well with this story, I think. 2 Israeli soldiers arrested in Belgium for Gaza war crimes. And Belgium was a signatory to this statement. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So Belgian federal police arrested 2 Israeli soldiers after the Hind Rajab Foundation, named after the little girl who I believe was 5 years old, who was killed by the Israeli military. So after the Hind Rajab Foundation and the Global Legal Action Network filed complaints earlier this week, A statement from the Hind Rajab Foundation said, quote, "The suspects were identified and arrested with a clear show of force at the Tomorrowland Festival in Boom. After being taken into custody, they were formally interrogated and released. The Belgian Federal Prosecutor's Office has confirmed that a criminal investigation is now underway," end quote. So they arrested and released, but they said that there is a investigation ongoing. And this Hind Rajab Foundation was formed as an effort to hold Israeli soldiers accountable for war crimes when they travel abroad. And this is one of those initiatives that I think it might have been last year, a while ago, that we saw reports in Israeli media that Israeli soldiers were being told, don't film your war crimes, don't post things on social media, because it's really incredible the stuff that they post themselves, blowing up buildings, wearing the clothing of women who they've displaced or killed. Really sick stuff. So the Federal Prosecutor's Office in Belgium announced that it received complaints from these two organizations and determined that they may have merit. The evidence used in the complaints was sourced from the soldiers' social media accounts. And so again, it's, the evidence is their own social media posts. So hopefully we see more of this in more European countries, that there's more accountability. All right, so the next one here, Israeli forces kill 130 Palestinians over 24 hours. So Gaza's health ministry said on Monday that Israeli forces killed 130 Palestinians and wounded 1,155 over the previous 24-hour period as airstrikes and massacres of people seeking aid continue. So over 1,000 casualties in a day, 130 killed, over 1,100 wounded. The health ministry said that another 4 bodies were recovered from the rubble, and among the dead were 99 Palestinians killed while seeking aid, most of whom were killed on Sunday in that big massacre that I covered in yesterday's show while attempting to reach UN aid trucks that entered northern Gaza. The ministry said that the number of Palestinians killed while seeking aid has risen to 1,021, and over 6,511 have been injured. You see this picture here of a man carrying the body of a child in a shroud. Israeli strikes on Monday included an attack on a water desalination plant in Gaza City, which killed at least 5 Palestinians, including a woman. In southern Gaza, 5 members of the same family were killed by a strike on tents sheltering displaced people. Also on Monday, Israeli tanks and ground troops launched an offensive in Deir al-Balah, central Gaza, the only city that has not seen major ground operations. Family members of Israeli captives believe many of the remaining hostages could be in this area, and they released a statement expressing concern over the new offensive. The Hostages and Missing Families Forum said in a statement, quote, "The families of the hostages are shocked and alarmed by these reports. As of this moment, we have received no official organized updates or satisfactory answers on this matter. The families of hostages are shocked and alarmed by these reports," end quote. So the new Israeli ground offensive comes amid this spike in starvation deaths in Gaza due to the blockade, the Israeli blockade. And many aid groups are based in Deir al-Balah. So this can disrupt the aid even more. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that 2 of the UN's guest houses in the area were struck by the IDF despite the Israeli military being aware of their location. So this big new offensive amid these starvations and everything that we're seeing. And I mean, I just can't understand how this just goes on. And this is all supported, would not be possible without support from the U.S. government. I saw, what's her name, Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary. She said something today like, oh, so many, Trump's not happy about all the killing in Gaza. He wants it to end. Well, if he wanted it to end, he literally has the power to end it. He could call Netanyahu and tell him it's over. But he doesn't do that. All right, so the next one here. Israel purchases $150 million in Humvees using U.S. military aid. So the Israeli Defense Ministry announced on Sunday that it had signed a $150 million contract to purchase hundreds of high-mobility, multi-purpose wheeled vehicles, commonly known as Humvees, in a deal financed by U.S. military aid. The defense ministry signed the deal with U.S. manufacturer AM General, and the first shipment of Humvees is expected to be delivered later this year. The deal is expected to replenish Humvees and military equipment that was used in Gaza. So this is, the U.S. continues to provide military aid, of course, and this is one of those deals that the U.S. is paying for. And I just mentioned in the article just how this comes at this horrific time with this violence just escalating and the starvation escalating. But we keep giving them money to buy weapons and military equipment. All right, so the next one here, Israeli Special Forces abduct director of hospital in Gaza. So this article is from Middle East Eye. So Israeli Special Forces have abducted Dr. Marwan al-Hams, director of Abu Yusuf al-Najjar Hospital, and a spokesperson for the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza, outside the International Committee of the Red Cross Field Hospital in the southern part of the enclave. The Palestinian Health Ministry said on Monday that Hams, who also oversees field hospitals in the Gaza Strip, was on his way to visit the ICRC facility in northern Rafah when undercover Israeli soldiers opened fire, killing one person and wounding another civilian before capturing him. The person killed was a local journalist who had been conducting an interview with al-Hams at the time of the attack. The health ministry said, quote, "The cowardly act targeted one of the most prominent humanitarian and medical voices who has conveyed to the world the pain of starving children, the suffering of wounded patients deprived of medication, and the cries of mothers at hospitals and at hospital gates. It clearly reflects a deliberate intention to silence the truth and obscure the suffering of an entire people enduring one of the worst health and humanitarian disasters," end quote. So an ICRC spokesperson said that they had admitted and treated patients wounded in the incident. And so this is just another attack on the health workers in Gaza, and he's part of the health ministry. And whenever you read, like, you know, mainstream Western media, they always call it the Hamas-run Ministry of Health. And that really obscures the fact that the people who lead the ministry, this guy who's a spokesman for the ministry, are doctors. And yes, they are part of the Hamas-led government. I mean, whatever's left of it at this point, but, you know, in Gaza. But these are doctors and medical professionals who run the health ministry. And this is who the Israeli military has abducted. And I know they've been going after the civilian government officials more so when they restarted the bombing, when they broke the ceasefire back in March. They started really hitting a lot of civilian officials. And I've been thinking lately, it's probably only a matter of time before they go after the health ministry. All right, so the next one here, IDF chief pushes Gaza takeover instead of concentration camp. So this one's from the Cradle. So the Israeli Army's chief of staff has suggested a plan to step up its genocidal assault on Gaza and seize more territory in the Strip as an alternative to the previously suggested initiative for displacing the entire population and confining it into a humanitarian city, that's in quotes there, in the south. That's in quotes because the plan is to create a concentration camp. But according to this report from Israel's Channel 12, this new plan from the head of the IDF is about taking over Gaza, widening control over Gaza to include more than 75% of the enclave. The report does not specify how much more the IDF chief of staff, Eyal Zamir, has suggested taking over. But essentially he's saying, and we've seen there's been pushback from the military about this plan to create the concentration camp for a lot of reasons. One reason is that they don't know if they could do it. And also it's such a clear war crime. There's just no other explanation for this. There's no other term for this. Forcing a civilian population into a camp where they can't leave, with the goal of forcing them to leave as part of a ethnic cleansing campaign. But apparently this is the new proposal. Let's just take over all the territory. All right. So the next one here, Trump caught off guard by Israel's Syria strikes. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt said on Monday that President Trump was caught off guard by Israel's recent airstrikes in Syria and the Israeli tank shelling of the Seoul Catholic Church in Gaza. Leavitt told reporters, quote, "He was caught off guard by the bombing in Syria and also the bombing of the Catholic Church in Gaza," end quote. The comments come after several reports that the Trump administration was unhappy with Israel's airstrikes in Syria, with one U.S. official saying that Netanyahu was a madman who's bombing everything. And I think these stories and these comments from Leave It make Trump just look very impotent and weak. The fact that he's giving Netanyahu everything that he wants, supplying all this military aid, and Israel's apparently doing things that he doesn't want, apparently killing all the babies and children and starving people in Gaza. That hasn't caught him off guard, I guess. It's just really pathetic and whatever. Sorry, I'm a little just, I don't know. It's just dealing with this stuff every day, reading about it every day, and you see these comments from these people. It's just like, this is the line for them, apparently, is bombing Al-Qaeda guys in Syria. Anyway, so also on Monday, Tom Barrack, the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, who serves as a special envoy to Syria, he also criticized Israel's airstrikes on Syria and expressed strong support for the Al-Qaeda-linked Syrian government, despite the massacres that its forces have committed against Druze civilians during the fighting in southern Syria's Hodeidah. Barrack told the Associated Press that the killing and the revenge massacres are intolerable, but he said, quote, "The current government of Syria, in my opinion, has conducted themselves as best as they can, as a nascent government with very few resources to address the multiplicity of issues that arise in trying to bring a diverse society together," end quote. I think if you're employing jihadists who are massacring minorities, that you're not really doing a great job at bringing a diverse society together. But Israel bombed Syrian government tanks that entered an area of southern Syria it wants to be demilitarized, and followed up the attack with airstrikes on the defense ministry in Damascus. Barrack said that the strikes came at a very bad time and insisted that the U.S. was not involved in the airstrikes, was not asked about them, was not involved in the decision. Barrack also said that Israel would rather see a fractured and divided Syria rather than one with a strong central government. This is interesting because I think this is very clearly the case. He said, quote, "Strong nation states are a threat. Especially Arab states are viewed as a threat to Israel," end quote. And, you know, I've seen people try to call me out for hypocrisy. On one hand, I'm very critical of the new Syrian government. On the other hand, I'm critical of Israel bombing Syria. And I mean, this idea that they're trying to protect the Druze minorities, it's clearly just a pretext. They want to keep this territory that they captured in Syria. They helped the regime change, celebrated it, used it as an excuse to invade southern Syria. And now they're claiming, oh, they care so much about the Druze. Like Netanyahu cares so much. That's why they're doing this. It's just very transparently not the case. And we're seeing people, I saw like Mark Levin, these super hardcore Israel supporters are tweeting all these things about these atrocities. There's real atrocities happening here in southern Syria, and saying, oh, why is everybody so quiet about this, blah, blah, blah. And then I look back and Mark Levin celebrated the overthrow of Assad, and he actually had a video titled, "Assad is out. Thank you, Israel," which is almost too absurd. But, the people that celebrated the regime change are now the ones using these, massacres that were easy to predict as a justification for Israeli military intervention. So the whole thing is just a tragedy in Syria. It's just a real shame. But the U.S. is also pressuring the Kurds in northeast Syria to integrate with the government. All right, so the next one here, U.S. envoy says that the U.S. cannot stop Israel from attacking Lebanon. So this is Barrack again. This is an article from Jason Ditz, and he's taking a much different tone with Lebanon. In Syria, he's saying, we didn't want them to attack, being critical of their military intervention. But when it comes to Lebanon, we can't really do anything about it. So U.S. Ambassador to Turkey Tom Barrack was in Lebanon again on Monday to meet with officials and to dismiss the guarantees that Lebanese officials were seeking. They want guarantees that Israel will stop bombing Lebanon, but Barrack is saying that they can't do that. So Barrack said that the U.S. has no business in trying to compel Israel to do anything. Again, just completely different than what he's saying about Syria. It's almost like too much. And this was a press conference that he gave in Lebanon. And the other comments he made about Syria was an interview with the AP while he was also in Lebanon. So again, just saying opposite things about Syria and Israel. So Barak also tried to rewrite the history of what the U.S. has been demanding with Lebanon, and what it has been threatening. Because recently he made a threat saying if Lebanon doesn't get in line, then Syria and Israel are going to take its territory. And now he's saying, oh, there was no threat. He tried to downplay all of that. But again, just to, with Lebanon, he's saying they got to get in line. We can't stop Israel from attacking. But with Syria, he's very deferential toward this other government that is committing really horrific atrocities. All right, so the next one here, Israel strikes on Yemen's Hodeidah port. On Monday, the Israeli military launched drone strikes on the Yemeni port of Hodeidah as the Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, continue to launch near daily missile and drone attacks on Israeli territory in response to Israel's genocidal war in Gaza. So the Israeli military claimed that it targeted engineering equipment working to restore port infrastructure that was damaged in previous attacks, fuel tanks and vessels that they claim were used for military activity. Yemeni media reported on the Israeli attack, but the extent of the damage and whether or not there are casualties is unclear. According to the Times of Israel, the strikes mark the 13th time that Israel bombed Yemen, and these operations have done nothing to deter the Houthis, who vow their attacks will continue until there's an end to the war and siege on Gaza. Previous Israeli attacks on Yemen involved dozens of Israeli warplanes, but Monday's strikes only involved Israeli Air Force drones. So it seems like it was a smaller attack than previous ones. And after the strikes, the Houthis, the military spokesman Yahya Saree, announced that Yemeni forces launched 5 drones at Israel. Israeli media said that one drone was fired from Yemen and shot down. And Saree said the operations will continue until the aggression against Gaza stops and the siege is lifted. And we saw those reports, I think, last week or 2 weeks ago or so that Israel was urging the U.S. to start bombing Yemen again. So far, there's no indication that that's going to happen. I remember there were some open source intel stuff about the U.S. stepping up surveillance around Yemen around that time. But so far, there's been no U.S. airstrikes. The Houthis say they're committed to the ceasefire with the U.S. The U.S. says they haven't broken the ceasefire because the commercial ships that they attacked were not American. So hopefully that ceasefire holds. All right, so the next one here, Israel's Red Sea port may shut down due to Houthi blockade. This one is from Kyle Anzalone again at the Libertarian Institute. So the head of Israel's Red Sea port said he could be forced to shut down operations as Ansar Allah's Red Sea blockade of Israeli shipping has cut business by 90%. So these military operations from Yemen have significantly hurt Israel in this way. Chief Executive Gideon Goldberg is now asking Israel for assistance to keep the port open. He's saying that Israel should offer ships a large financial incentive of $500,000 to risk transiting the Red Sea to keep the port of Eilat open. He said that you cannot let terror organizations close any route. In November 2023, Kyle gets into the background here. That's when they first declared the blockade on Israeli-linked shipping. And they ended it when there was a ceasefire in Gaza. And then once Israel broke the ceasefire, first violated the deal by imposing the blockade on Gaza, a total blockade. The Houthis said that they would reimpose their blockade on Red Sea shipping, on Israeli-linked Red Sea shipping. And that's when the Trump administration started bombing Yemen. And then they failed to get the Houthis to stop targeting Israel. So the U.S. essentially gave up after bombing the country for a month and a half. And it does seem like they're doing some real economic harm to Israel. The clear solution to all this is a ceasefire in Gaza. All right, so the last story here, Russia and Ukraine to hold another round of talks. Russian and Ukrainian officials are set to hold another round of peace talks this week amid heavy fighting across the front line in Ukraine, and as the two sides continue to trade major drone attacks. Zelensky announced that the talks will take place this Wednesday, July 23rd in Istanbul. Russian media confirmed that there would be upcoming negotiations, but they said that the talks will be held on Thursday, July 24th, that the delegations will probably get there a day earlier, but the talks are expected to happen on Thursday. The delegations will be led by the same people, the Russian side by Vladimir Medinsky, who's an aide to Putin. And then the Ukrainian side will be led by Ukraine's defense minister, Rustem Umerov. And the negotiations will mark the first round of talks between the two sides in 7 weeks. I always think peace talks are good, but unfortunately, I really don't expect any progress here because Russia has made very clear, despite Trump's threats of tariffs and his announcing this plan to dump more weapons into Ukraine, Russia has made clear that they're going to keep going. They're going to continue the war until they reach their goals. And I think if they, as long as things go on, Ukraine stands to lose more and more. And then on the Ukrainian side, Zelensky is not going to make concessions as long as the U.S. and NATO continue supporting the war. And realistically, just don't see the U.S. and NATO pulling that support. So I just feel like this war is going to go on. But hopefully I'm wrong and some sort of progress is made during these talks. And this was, again, 7 weeks ago was the last time they met. This picture's from June 2nd in Istanbul. And the peace talks that they held earlier this year were the first time since the early days of the invasion that there were talks. In March and April of 2022, they held peace talks. And at the time, Russia's main demand was neutrality, Ukrainian neutrality. They said that they would have withdrawn from the territory that they captured. Those peace talks were discouraged by the U.S. and NATO, who were saying, don't negotiate, don't make a deal, fight. We're going to fund your war. We're going to give you all these weapons. And then later that year in 2022, once the peace talks broke down and everything, the fighting continued, Russia declared that it annexed those 4 Ukrainian oblasts. And since then, that's been a demand from Russia to end the war, for Ukraine to withdraw from the territory that it still controls in those areas and recognize them as Russian. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Ted Galen Carpenter. NATO's proxy war against Russia becomes increasingly reckless. One from Caitlin Johnstone. Gaza isn't starving, it is being starved. One from Peter Van Buren. The real meaning of the State Department, RIF. One from Judge Napolitano. No due process at Gitmo. And our spotlight is from Imad Khatami, what the West misunderstands about Iran. Please go check all that out. Go check out the other content on our page. We have our blog and everything. But that is it for me for today. You could always support us by liking, subscribing, commenting, all that stuff. If you want to help antiwar.com out with a monetary donation, go to antiwar.com/donate. Follow us on social media, on X, on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Also, I did the Jimmy Dore show today, which was cool. Jimmy Dore was not there. It was guest hosted by Misty Winston, who does a great job and has a great show herself. And they live stream it, and then I think in the next day or two they usually put out clips on YouTube. They have like 1.5 million subscribers over there, which is pretty crazy. So check that out if you see it. We talked about the atrocities in Gaza, the attacks on Palestinian Christians, and the air war in Somalia that nobody on earth seems to care about. But anyway, that is it for me for today. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Pray for peace, and thank you for listening.